Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for being patient. We are happy to welcome you here at the Garage Museum of Contemporary Art, and we are happy to have these 10 days of architecture. We presented the book about Oleg Pavlov last week, and now we are having curator of the Venice Biennale and Kirill Alejandro Aravena and Kirill Asse. For example, worked at Peter Weibel exhibition. So if you haven't been there yet, you should go and see it. So I would like to give the floor to Kirill, and we are also very happy to mention that we are having a conference on Friday and Saturday about Soviet modernism, and so we're happy to welcome such a good audience, such a big audience tonight. I should also say that this is part of cultural program of open innovations, and so we are going to have a series of events, and we are also supported by Theory and Practice, so you can see some events on their website. Please check their website.
It was like whole introductions, you know. So what I can start with. So you have been traveling for 36 hours directly from Chile, no? Yeah. Good Lord. So we will try to keep it short.
No, the other way around. I mean, I'm here, so let's take off.
Okay, fine. Take the mic so everybody can hear it. So I'll just start from the top, yeah, because I don't really know a lot about the stuff you do, and I've read around something to try to find out what are you doing. Not because of the Biennale, but because of our meeting. Just to be honest. So if I'm losing my control, don't be losing the ideas what I'm doing. Don't be surprised. So, and when I was browsing through your website, I was surprised to find that you use some specific architectural language, which is quite formal, large forms, direct forms, very austere sometimes, using cheap materials, local materials, and these kind of things. And as long as you're famous now for your socially active projects, I was wondering, when you're doing your private houses like this Casa Escultura or something like this Anceletto Angelini building, how do you come up with the form? Where does it come from? How do you define the language you are pursuing? And most of all, what is the addressee of this? Whenever you are trying to do something, you keep somebody in mind. Maybe not, because it's easy to say that it's coming from like some technical requirements or needs of the site or something. But at the end, these needs are translated into some form, and I'm interested, how do you come up with it? Where do you take them from your mind, and who do you address with the form?
Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and sorry for being late. As you said, I'm just coming from Chile now, so traveling for more than a day. And there was some traffic coming here, so I know you've been waiting for half an hour. So I hope we will be able to compensate with the conversation of the waiting that you've been having. So, going to your question, where does our forms come from? I will answer that, but I will have to start by saying that we try to postpone our forms as much as possible into the process. We try rigorously not to want anything until very late in the process. We try, first of all, to try to understand the question before going into the answer. Somehow the form is the answer, but before going into the answer, we invest a lot of time in designing the question. By that I mean that we try to identify which are the forces at play that will give shape to a specific building. Another way to explain it, form is informed by different realms, by different knowledges, by different desires, different interests, and different forces. And we try to be as rigorous as possible in identifying what should inform the form of a project. That can come, as you said, from structure, from the climate, from the laws, from the budget, which are kind of very easy to explain because they're rather tangible. You can give numbers to those things. So we try to build an equation, and we talk of equations not because we believe architecture is a science, but because it's a good way to be really clear of the terms that then you will need to satisfy once you produce the form. But besides those things that are rather easy to measure, there are intangible forces as well, like the character of a building, the hidden desire of a client or a community or a society. And all that, we also believe, informs the form of a project. What we just try to avoid is that what comes up front is the desire to do this and that form. I mean, I'm desperately trying to look for a pyramid or a cube or something very austere. Even in those terms, I mean, we want not to want, at the beginning at least, so that the problem is charged as richly as possible, because, and we have said this many times, there's nothing worse than answering well the wrong question. If we don't spend enough time in building the question, then the answer might be right, but to the wrong question. And this is a disaster. I mean, architecture involves so much resources, money, time, energy, that to waste those resources in answering well the wrong question would be not just a pity, but it would be really an irresponsibility. So that is the first thing. We try to start by X equal question mark, not know what form something should have. Once the problem is charged, and this is a process that goes back and forth, sometimes structure is relevant, sometimes it's not relevant. I mean, it informs the project, but it will not make the difference. I mean, you could build that project in many different materials or many building systems, and it would be rather pretty much the same. But for that project, maybe a budget could be relevant. So we don't put in this equation, in this kind of cloud of terms that we have to respond to, every single aspect that architecture has to respond to, but those that are relevant to that particular moment. So sometimes use is important, sometimes the program is relevant, sometimes the budget matters, sometimes the budget doesn't matter. You just have to fulfill the budget, otherwise you don't build it. But it's not relevant to the project. So for Angelini Center, budget was not an issue. I mean, if you're not stupid, you will put the building into the budget. But for social housing, budget is absolutely crucial. So this is what makes that one project is so different from each other, not but looking for diversity because as a consequence of the question being different in one case or in the other. Normally, when you start building the question, it tends to be complex, even if you don't want to. It has to respond at least to 4, 5 dimensions. So the more complex the question, the more need for simplicity. There was a moment in architecture where because the world is complex, then the answer has to be complex. I mean, I think it's completely stupid. And I think it was at the very beginning of our social housing project, where my partner was an engineer that had no idea what architecture was, and in that sense, not knowing what you do, I think is very healthy. You were saying that you had no idea what we do at the beginning. I think that's fantastic, not to have a clue what you do, because then you don't arrive in advance with something proven. Unless you say reasonable things, you do not gain the respect for doing the things that you're proposing. That was my case with my own partner. And he said, I don't understand you architects. Why try to give complicated answers when the question is already difficult? The more difficult the question, the more simple the answer should be. So one of the attributes of form should be to translate in as simple as possible output that very complex, sophisticated income or input. I've said this also in other circumstances, like in the TED talk, because when I gave this TED talk last year, the title I wanted to have it for it, then the TED organization did a different thing. I wanted it to be called the power of synthesis. If there's any power in design, that's the power of synthesis. You have many dimensions informing the form of a project, but then there's a moment where you jump into the void, make a drawing, sketch, or a form, whatever, and that moment should, if possible, synthesize all those dimensions that you have charged your question with. So that form should be as synthetic as possible. It is not just a question of economy of means, it's a question of being able to resist the test of time. I mean, if not synthetic enough, then, too many things will collapse over the lifetime of a building. So, once this is clarified, and I'm not going to avoid your question, who is the bag in our head? Who is in the back of our eyes when you finally draw something. When you finally draw, yeah, because designed. and let me put it this way: what we tend to do is to swallow a lot of information, the body of knowledge of architecture, as wide as possible, so that when there's the challenge of translating into form a given question, out of all the material that we've swallowed, we pick the one that is more pertinent. So that's why we try to charge our background, formal background, with different approaches in case from that one and not from this one is the one that is the case for that question. And this goes from Louis Kahn, for example. I would say that I was I went to a Louis Kahn building for the first time in 2009 in India and in Bangladesh afterwards. And these are those moments when you try to measure what you're doing with what the person like that did, and you feel like shit. I mean, it's really so far away what you thought was good architecture compared to what being in those buildings in the middle of a very complex context. Those buildings could have been 2,000 years old or could have been built in the next 2 decades. I mean, that timelessness of Louis Kahn's architecture is something that floors you. Somehow you realize you're really, really far away from what architecture could have been over time. So Kahn has been, and Kahn in India and Bangladesh, not the buildings in the US, which I think are too soft or too domesticated. I think in India they're closer to the force of nature and to the force of the climate, also engaging naturally with that society, which is a very strange thing, particularly the building in Bangladesh. is something that is a kind of flying saucer coming out of the blue. Simultaneously, people relate to it as if it was a kind of architecture that was always there. It's a very mysterious kind of architectural language that is strange and natural and at the same time for that given question and place. Another architect that I admire / envy a lot, because I think this is at least the way we look at people that we kind of really admire simultaneously. As soon as you see something good, it's like, fuck, that guy did that first and out. I mean, it's not your idea anymore. So it is somewhere here. You weren't there fast enough to come up with something like that. So this mixture between admiring, envying architecture also happened to us in the office with an Argentinian architect that unfortunately died, I think, 3 weeks ago. It's Rafael Iglesia. Again, one of those moments where you meet the guy, not just the guy, the buildings, and you call back the office, and I remember it must have been 2000 maybe. Looking at his work, I felt embarrassed of what we were doing in the office. I called back to Chile and said, look, stop what we're doing. I mean, again, this, in the sense that when you have a project, it's not that we have a project every day. For us, getting a job is really hard. So when you get a commission, finally, you would like to make sure that you make the best out of that commission. And of course, that required to convince people to get the question right and all that, but also that you have the best possible idea. And in the process, during the process, you realize that your idea was okay here, and it was okay, and nobody would have noticed, but you yourself know that it could have been here. Out of that, measuring yourself against these big figures, then you better make sure if your client allow on in the project, whatever the circumstances allow, you say, you know what, can we have a second chance? We had several projects at the time already with the building permits and approved, but then once they were built, then because they will remain there for decades, you will have to live with the thing that you knew you could have done better for a long time. So if there's a chance, whenever this has happened, we stop the projects and try to make it, okay, again, not good enough. Another architect I think it's absolutely brilliant is a Chilean architect, Smiljan Radic, which is one of the, I think, the attributes of good architecture. When you're in the place, is much better than the photographs. I used to be in the Pritzker Prize jury, and I remember comments that some member of the juries, because one condition to give the prize is that you had to know the buildings personally. So part of the process was visiting architecture in different places. And I remember once Glenn Murcutt arriving to a country, which I'm not going to disclose, and we went to visit this famous buildings, and he said, wow, this country has really good photographers. I guess that normally you are so disappointed by the architecture building and then the media propagating who's who in the architecture world, that when it happens the other way around, that you arrive to a place that was not captured by pictures, that had to be experienced. It's a kind of, it's a sign that you're in front of great architecture, and I think Smiljan Radic's work is something like that. Another architect I would mention as an incredible reference, even though all of them might be far away from your taste, let's say. Yeah. It's in Paraguay, Solano Benitez. He won the first BSI award in Switzerland, maybe 6 years ago, something like that. Working with brick in one of the most poor, corrupt countries in the world, and yet his architecture is so above this, beyond the circumstances. Yeah, I mean, the list sometimes is not just an entire body of work, it's just a specific building that you go. Wangshu, for example, with the Ningbo Museum of History. I mean, that's a building that is it's a hit in the face, a hard one, not just a slab. I mean, you arrive there, and again, is this F moment. You know, you arrive and you're, fuck, this is good. There you have 5 names.
I was just wondering about this moment you just mentioned, of this notion of best and the idea of this invisible force that strikes you actually, because you said that you want to go away from the question who is this behind thing, who are you addressing with your work, and this unknown. I'm trying to, it's a question I'm trying to find out for myself as well, because I never know. I totally understand this envy and love for some architects, yes, the living ones. I totally agree about Smilan, because I met him in person some time ago, and he is totally amazing personally. And he's Smilan Radic. I met him some time ago, and he's amazing personally and fantastic architect as well. And what he does is mind-blowing indeed. And there are some more people of this kind, of course. But the nature of this mind-blowing and of this envy is really interesting, because it's never so readily understandable why. I had this experience of this kind years ago when I was studying in the architectural school. We went to Amsterdam and visited just the freshly built Piraeus building by Kohlhoff, this German architect, and it totally blown my mind away. So when we came back, we were students, we had to present analysis of the buildings we've seen. So we tried to analyze it with a friend of mine who we were studying together, and we just couldn't. At one point we said, there are things you could not analyze, because you can go into analysis. Of course, this is like this, and this goes because of that, and this is the site, and this is the insulation, and this is the light, and this is it's a social housing apartment, housing building. So, and then you just find out that there are things you shouldn't be speaking about, and these things are actually the most interesting. So that was why when you said there are things, there is the idea of best, which is, of course, we can go into it answers this and this and this and this question, and it did a good design of the question and answered them in the best possible way, possibly, and but still it evades somehow the grasping of intellect, and this actually connects us a little bit to the idea of beauty I was planning to bring to the very end, which is again something intangible, but still it emanates from certain buildings, and there is one more strange thing, that not everybody grasps this beauty also. So you can share it with some people, and some people don't get it for some reason, and it's a problem of course, I guess you have it the same in Chile, and we have it here, when there are different notions of taste, and the tastes are very different, and there is this amount of people who are interested in some certain contemporary, so to say, looks, and others are, because of their education or anything else, are into neo-rococo and baroque style stuff. So I was wondering, how is this? Where does except for education and tastes, how could you define or have you thought about this actually bestness, where it comes from, and how to grasp it? Did you try it ever?
I guess that there's a reason why I'm not teaching anymore. I stopped teaching in 2004 after leaving Harvard, because I absolutely agree with just describing. We arrived to the point to be able to give a name to why we can talk about it, which is that architecture is guided maybe as art, or and actually maybe like many things in life, by unspeakable certainties. You know, but you can't talk about it. Why? You come to the office and say something like this, like that. Yeah, there. What, you know, but you can't tell.
You cannot explain it to anybody. Yeah?
But it works. I mean, it works to the point, at least in our office, where we're 5 partners. We are discussing among 2 this kind of thing. Then we're moving things around, and somebody enters the room without not knowing what we're talking about, and he says, "Isn't it better like that?" Exactly the point where we were talking about before. I mean, why does that happen? I think that's the unspeakable certainties. I don't know who. I mean, this must be a kind of cliche as a quote, but it's like time. Time. You know what it is. As soon as I ask you define time, you're in deep trouble. You know, but we both know what it is.
Yep.
So I guess that architecture ultimately arrives to that unspeakable certainty. And I hate quoting. Or I mean, it's not that I'm very intelligent in the sense of, you know, because I'm going to quote this and that important thinker, then whatever I say will have more status. But in this case, I have no other choice. There's Ludwig Wittgenstein, who said there are 2 kinds of things: the ones that you can't talk about and the ones that you cannot talk about. About the ones that you can't talk about, you should talk clearly. Simple, you know, make sense to everybody. Do not overcomplicate, do not oversimplify the stuff. But about the ones that you can't talk about, you better remain silent. That's why I guess teaching is so difficult. And that at this point, we in the office take people that should spend at least 4 months or more than that, at least, because in the first 2 months, they have to sit in the discussion, shut up, and listen. And eventually, in the 3rd month or 4th month, they will also be able to do this. And they say, right, you got it. Might be, this is not even a theory, not a method or nothing, but it might be like singing. I mean, when you're singing, there's a moment where you give the right note, and until that moment, I mean, you have to keep on touching, no, too low, too high, too low. There's a moment where it's there. And then you get the thing or you don't get it. That's why it's so difficult to teach architecture. As soon as you begin to try to give words to the unspeakable certainties, it becomes a theory, it becomes an ideology, it becomes something that, you know, it smells bad, it's fishy. So you end up trying to accommodate things to match your theory, or you over-intellectualize things that you shouldn't be over-intellectualizing. Actually, the way we tend to develop a project in the office is rather embarrassing. I mean, the words that we use are extremely stupid. You know, the character, the taste, I cannot even reproduce this in English because it's Chilean slang. That's stupid. It is the way we talk about these unspeakable certainties. But I definitely think, so going back to the question of the speakable aspects and the unspeakable certainties, about those that can't be talked about, we're very rigorous and rational, cold-blooded. I mean, this doesn't make sense, this is stupid. I mean, if I talk to somebody and the person kind of does a strange face away, this is not going anywhere. So about those, we try to be really, really tough ourselves and clear to the client, not throwing any kind of smoke to disguise what you're trying to talk about. But then on the other hand, to compensate, there's a moment where even with a client that doesn't know anything about, you said, why there? I mean, you take it or leave it. I mean, that at that point, I mean, it can't be said. If you don't agree, fine, there are several other architectural offices out there.
That's a pretty tough position, actually.
But you know what? It's very important. It's very important because you're called for the last project that you did. So if the last project you did does not really convince yourself, you will keep on doing stuff that you don't believe in, and this is going to be a nightmare. It might be financially good, but I guess that on the long term, I think it's a tragedy that that you're called for your works, and in those works were not at the best possible level, then you kept on being called for things that you don't like to do.
Quite true. It was really hot. Okay, so I think we had a lot. I was just to finalize this somehow, because now you're known for this social responsibility architecture. Sorry, that's how it sounds, at least, because this system of half housing became so popular, and you continue to develop it somehow. I was wondering when I was writing this in the letter, while it's okay, it's very relevant, it's extremely severe because you have really restricted budgets and so on and so on. You have the concept already, so you have to implement it, and in a different way. Still, it changes, of course, and because for different projects, it's different. And then I was wondering if the social aspect really is creating its own, maybe not formal, but to a certain extent decorative, in a way, language. Because at the end, we still have to use stone or wood or concrete in this way or other way. And, you know, these columns are made with, you know, simple planks, right? And other columns are made in shuttering. And this choice is not always, you know, readily available. It could be the same price at the end, and could be the same time at the end. And this moment of choice between these two, very similar but still differently feeling things, apart from this is right and this is not, or maybe how this is right or this is not decision, how it comes to. Sorry about being picky.
No. Okay, the social. Let me start by the social responsibility thing. We've never, ever, from our point of view, claimed any kind of moral superiority or ethical kind of accusation to the architectural community that social housing, it's you're a better person if you do that. I mean, not even close.
You did plenty of not social housing, so.
And the reason why we do social housing is not we think we're good people. We are not particularly good people. I want to get paid for what I do, and as much as possible, hopefully fair enough, because if anything, social housing is a difficult question. It has intellectual merit. It's the most difficult of the questions. Let's say if I go to the doctor and I have go to the emergency room, and whatever doctor is there, it's fine. I mean, unless it's a life or death kind of thing, maybe the sequels are not, you know, complicated. If I want to get brain surgery, first of all, it's a planned surgery. I mean, you plan ahead in time, and you want the best possible surgeon for doing something in your brain, because 1 millimeter error will mean that you're blind, that you can't walk anymore, that you can't speak, whatever. So social housing is like brain surgery. I mean, if you make a mistake, it will be multiplied by thousands of units and it will be irreversible, like brain surgery. I mean, whatever is built in cities, and particularly in developing countries, I mean, because of the number, but because of the scarcity of resources, that mistake will remain there forever with huge social, political consequences that then are so much beyond architecture. So when I try to, and then we can't control that the press talks about the social responsibility that architecture should have. Well, if there is a social responsibility, or the social, call it duties, then there are the social rights as well. I think architects have the same way. If they have the responsibility to do social housing, then they have the right to get paid well. Actually, what we identified at the very beginning, why social housing was so bad, is because nobody pays quality professional time to think about it better. It should be the highest, better paid job because of the consequences it has. So, if anything, it's a difficult question. In that sense, again, we go back to the power of architecture as the power of synthesis. That's why we try to apply that knowledge, that capacity to translate into a form that has many dimensions, and in social housing, those are expressed very directly. It's a kind of new, you can't hide anything. Actually, synthesis is not even an option. There's no 1 centimeter of room to do something that is not irreducible. That's why you have to, bring your form to its bare bones. Of course, depending on the circumstances, those housing units will have different choices. I mean, depending on the weather, depending on the material availability. We start our first project in the north, in the desert of Chile, which has no wood. So concrete was the only, no, even clay, so bricks that were not available. It was concrete blocks. So the expression of that box comes from whatever was available there in the desert. When we moved to the center of the country, brick was an alternative. Many of the projects throughout this, Chile, it's 5,000 kilometer long. It goes from Moscow to Mumbai. So you have pretty much all the geographical circumstances you can possibly encounter. If we move south to Patagonia, then of course it rains it rains a lot, and there's forests, so it's wood, the thing that you should go for. But besides that is the density, depending on how big the city, and the cultural capacity to engage or not. In any case, what we found in the social housing project was a very kind of healthy starting point that was based on numbers. Evidence showed that a middle-class family can live reasonably well in around 80 square meters. And that, I don't know if it's the case here, I don't know what's the average size for a middle-class apartment could be, but that works in London, it works in Latin America, it works in China. So around 80 square meters.
Everywhere, generally.
Public money could pay in Chile from 30 to 40. So what the market was doing was interpreting the lack of resources that allowed to build 30 to 40 square meters as a small house. The only thing we did was, if middle class is 80 and with public money we can build 40, why don't we rethink that 40 square meters, instead of being a small house, it's half of a good one. As soon as you reframe the question, and this, go back to again, try to understand well the right question, not the wrong one. Instead of doing the best possible small 40 square meter house, do the best possible half of a good one. This shift, once you reframe that as half of a good house instead of a small one, then the key question is, which half do we do? And with public money, this is almost the definition of a public policy, you do the half that a family cannot build on their own. The case for 2 billion people in the world is that if what they receive, either from the state, from their family savings, from the market, is not big enough, they will make it grow anyhow, and that process of growth will stabilize around 80 square meters. And this can happen thanks to the design or despite the design. Normally, this is a fact that happens in any case, but design does not take into consideration that this will happen anyhow. That is one thing. The other thing is that the historical criticism to social housing is that it was monotonous, it was for the economy of the construction and the industrialization or whatever, you tend to come up with very repetitive solutions, which was unable to capture the diversity of societies, the family structure, the productive nature of each household. So the city is such a diverse fabric that was unable to be hosted by a monotonous solution. So you see in the history of social housing, and actually in many of the attempts today, that design is a kind of introducing some noise into this kind of monotonous structure so that we can either introduce identity, individuality, some kind of, is adding some sauce to something that is very hard to swallow, kind of thing. But that is when you're trying to build the whole unit. If there's not enough money, in the problem of not having enough money was the solution to the historical problem of monotony. When you have money for just half of the house, your problem is just the contrary. How do you control that individual performances do not create a chaotic, lack of quality in the intervention? So, when you create, and because of the scarcity, instead of having a closed system, that of already finished units, you are forced to have an open system that will be completed over time, that will by definition be incremental, then the more monotonous the first half of the house, the better you will be kind of introducing a silent, neutral frame to individual performances that instead of deterioration will act as a customization of the neighborhood, the street, the block, whatever you call it. So that's why, which for economic reasons is great news, the more monotonous the first half, the better. That's the austerity is a consequence of the lack of resources, but even if we had more resources, since the system will be completed not by us, but it will have an uncertain future, then the more dry, severe that first half, the better. And this first half assumes many different forms depending on the context. But this is somehow the trade-off. In front of scarcity, respond with incrementality, an open system. And to deal with the diversity, well, go for the most neutral, severe first half, which for money is great news.
Well, this brings us to, I don't know, have you been here before? No, in Russia, a couple of times. So you've probably seen the result of what you thought with your project, actually. Yeah, but you've seen the cities and how they look, because specifically of that attitude to social housing that you tried to fight and actually started winning the battle. And I was trying, because of the more or less, because, how to say, I was just wondering, of course you said already about this, but do you see some specific local problem with some specific local qualities of the fabric, and do you have some like ready-made feeling about this, and can you share it if you have?
Well, I guess that here there's an extra difficulty. So was it not difficult enough to do social housing? The weather here, I guess, introduces an extra degree of difficulty. Well, Because just to give a little bit of context, the process of urbanization of the world, meaning people going to cities at the huge speed, big scale, which in principle is great news, to the point that in the next decades we'll have 2 billion people living in cities that are below the poverty line. And that process will happen mainly in between the tropics. So it's going in countries that are poor and that are hot. This is not the case here. And I guess that open incremental system performs much better in the hotter, poorer countries where the major need is anyhow. Here you have the problem of the weather, which is a little bit what the problem we had in the southern part of Chile in Patagonia. So there, instead of going for half of a good house, you know, like, so this is one half, and adjacent to it was the other half. In that case, the definition of half of a good house was on the perimeter or on the core. In the southern part of Chile, what we tried to provide was an insulated shell, but then inside was empty. So the flexibility was not visible to the city, but it was more for the internal structure of the family. Families that had a business at home, or that had many children, or depending on the family structure, will accommodate inside. And that one could call it a kind of loft approach. You go for the big structure, so for a superstructure, plus the infrastructural sewage, water, electricity, and then allow the inside to be taken care by families themselves. And this is the way you split your money. Finally, if you don't have enough money, the thing is you establish a priority and do first what's more difficult and what cannot be done individually. In that list, in here, I will say the external skin, waterproof, will rank very high in that list.
And heating too.
And heating, and that will not be the case in other places. So the thing is that your list of priorities varies, and that might have consequences on how the city looks, in a way already more monotonous that you would look in other places. But where does, I would say, the power of this particular city, and that's how I was. Again, I'm not that knowledgeable. I've been here a couple of times, but not have a deep knowledge of the place. What impressed me the most was the quality of the public space, of the open space. Sometimes the fabric, yeah, it's nothing special. Maybe from older periods of time, you know, there's boxes that were rather anonymous. Which, by the way, for the city fabric is not bad news. I think it's much better that each box trying to cry out loud, which is the expression of the capitalist version of the towers, each, you know, shouting but saying nothing. So if I have to choose, I prefer a silent architecture that happens inwards. That's another architecture that, you know, shouts but has nothing to say. But what kind of balances that is the standard, the hierarchy of the public space, connected to the geographical facts of the city, the river, the width of the streets, and for this to happen at this way, what is needed is not money, is coordination. I mean, for protecting the void in a city, what you need is a vision. It's a coordinated power that will save that amount of empty space in between the buildings, and there's a lot of potential. I was not long ago in Colombia, in Bogota, meeting with the former mayor of Bogota, Peñalosa, that, by the way, last weekend won the election. He was the one that implemented the Transmillennium, the bus rapid transit in Bogota. Again, in a country with an internal war, with drug dealing cartels, with the worst situations in the world, and yet they were able to use the city as a way to improve quality of life of people. And talking to him, he said that for him the battle was the space in between the buildings. I mean, I think he's an economist or an engineer. I really don't know what he is. But as a politician, he said, what I'm interested in is the void in between buildings. Everybody's competing for that space, normally assigned to mobility. I mean, trying not just to public space as parks, which the standard here is really fantastic. Cities are measured for what you do in them for free. The better the parks, the better the standard of the city, because you don't need any income to enjoy. I mean, rich man and lower class man can benefit from that quality of space equally. That's the importance of public space. But when you go down to the street, everybody's competing for that space. Cars, public transportation, bicycles, pedestrians, parking. So in his list of priorities, how do I assign space in between buildings is a way to be redistributive, to be equal to citizens, to he was talking about this is democracy in its best version. How I'm going to administrate the space in between the buildings. And here you inherited an amount of void in between buildings that very few cities in the world, I mean, once you lose it, there's no turning back. And this, I think, is maybe a way to improve the quality of life of the city more than concentrating on the shapes and forms of the boxes.
You several times in our talk we used some military metaphors, and your Biennale theme is news from the front, yeah, really. Reporting from the front, yeah, and I was wondering why, of course, we understand that it's always kind of a battle on one hand. On the other hand, employing this, you know, we are fighting country at the moment for some reason, and employing this kind of language was somehow, you know, architecture is like thought to be peaceful thing, and it is actually not. But employing this language was bringing me to the thought that maybe there is some kind of a too much softness in the contemporary architectural, from your point of view possibly, a contemporary architectural discourse, and you wanted to somehow fuel it up, you know, bring up some temperature into it. Am I right in this respect?
Kind of. I'm more than softness or peaceful or calmness, which I think are the ultimate attributes of good architecture, some calmness. I mean, the reporting from the front idea comes from that to make quality stuff, it's hard. I mean, it is not easy. I mean, if you want to do business as usual, maybe you do it and somebody does it. You don't even care. As soon as you want to do something good, for some reason, it's extremely difficult. So that friction, that breaking the inertia of things, trying to go beyond the status quo, is the kind of thing I wanted architects to share. Because the effort of doing something well, being extremely difficult, I mean, you can feel very lonely in that effort. As soon as you know that there's a lot of other people, you feel more accompanied, you feel more encouraged to keep on doing it that way, that it makes sense to make the extra effort. You may get some ideas from these other people reporting from the fronts as well. So more than the military metaphor, it's on the difficulty on trying to move the edge of things into a better quality built environment. And from there, I thought it would be useful for an event where we're sharing experiences that we get the glass half full and not half empty. That the idea of the front could be, depending on the question, that you're dealing with tough questions, like poverty or violence in cities or underdevelopment or mediocrity. Sometimes the limit is more subtle. Let's say in the US maybe, the difficulties come from everybody being afraid of lawyers suing you in case you don't comply with what's in the manual. That's why very few quality architecture comes from the United States. Everybody's afraid of the lawyer, nobody moves. So in that case, more than the difficulty that would be obvious in developing countries and the third world, even in a first world country, I mean, quality built environments are hard to produce for different reasons. And I wanted to understand if we could share knowledge in those difficulties that we will have to face.
I see. So in this, it means that actually the front is more or less the same in great respect, because we are fighting for this quality of built environment, which is different for all, or it's more or less the same. Because when you say about this quality, I start to wonder, what is this quality finally? What is the quality we're pursuing? Because does there exists some common ground, to quote the previous Biennale, common ground for this quality?
Well, maybe it has different expressions in different places, but I guess that kind of unspeakable certainty, you go to a place and this is a nice place. I mean, one of the conditions, maybe two. I mean, this is something I learned from one of my mentors at the university. He said that the way to recognize great architecture is because it's both a mirror and a cloak. Mirror in the sense that it is a cultural object that if you pay attention to, if you interrogate the object, it should be able to resist that careful look, to the point that it may reflect a moment of the development of that society, of the techniques, of the technology, of the sensibility, of the moment in time, even from the creator. So if you pay attention, it resists that interrogation as a cultural object. Simultaneously, that good architecture is recognized because its capacity to completely disappear in the rear of the eye, and we don't even pay attention to the thing because we do what we have to do. In this room, for example, we may not even know where we are if the conversation is nice and it allows for a good conversation. It's not freezing cold, there's not too much reverberation, the light is right, the pavement, gives some kind of quality and atmosphere to the feeling, the way that people in the back may not be looking at me now. So that already begins to be a problem, because those people are more worried to try to move their head than trying to focus on what I'm saying. So it introduces some noise that becomes this building less adapt to disappear in the corner of the eye. He was referring to a window, because a window, it's on the one hand part of an architectural language. Let's say it has a grammatic, it has from the proportion and the way it spans over that, you can talk about the structure, the level of technology that was available at the time when the window was produced, because of the proportion. I mean, you can build an entire discourse if you pay attention to the window about the kind of society and architect and the state of the art that allowed that building to have that form and not a different one. So going back again, what informs the form of that window? At the same time, the ultimate purpose of that window is to completely disappear so that we can look through, light enters, air and ventilation, and so that capacity to go from being interrogated and resist that careful look and simultaneously completely disappear in the corner of the eye is one of the things that I would say defines quality. What I do also know, though, is that in the way the built environment is being produced today, what for sure is non-quality is to use the built environment to produce profit. Is the ultimate way, or let's say, if building a building like this and not with a different form has as an ultimate goal just the profit of the investor, then for sure the quality of that building is bullshit. So I guess that is what is the kind of things that we should not get confused. I mean, use the built environment just as a way to make more money. And if it's more profitable, you go to the stock exchange or you put your money in mining industry, or because now it's better, let's build something that for sure at least doesn't have the ultimate goal in quality of life of whoever then will live in a place, work in a place, study in a place, all the verbs that you want that are rather simple. So I guess that this is not rocket science. I mean, this is just, why do we build the things that we build? In order to study reasonably well, in order to live well, in order to have a conversation well, whatever. And so those verbs, or to make profit. As soon as the ultimate reason to build something is make profit, I think that we're in front of the lack of quality.
So actually it comes down to economic reasons to a certain extent, right? So we are not, as long as you have...
But I think it's beyond economic reasons. Because if in the process of building whatever, I mean, you want to make your profit. Let's say, let's build a place to study. We call it school. And the builder wants to get a fair enough profit out of that. Fine, make your money. I think it's perfectly fine the same way I want to get paid to design that school. The thing is when that reasonable or fair enough gain that you get from the entire building process is replaced by greed, where the only thing that you want to do is to make money for the sake of making money. So ultimately, that economical flaw is a human flaw, which is greed. Greed being ultimately, I think, a sign of insecurity. I mean, you need to show your value by showing how much money you have. You don't trust that you're a valuable person unless you show how much. Money is one of the few things that is able to compare and measure your value. And when it goes down to personality, I think, yeah, it's an ultimate sign of insecurity. So it's a human thing.
Well, also it's a kind of self-sustaining flow, because people who are into like real business, they don't, it's, you know, this level over the greed. It's already just, it has to go like this because the numbers just, you don't care already about like some specific, it's not greed because you cannot, you know, you cannot spend this. Your children couldn't spend it, and so on.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not great in terms of accumulating more. It's just to have more than the guy next door in the club. I mean, that group, I mean, want to showing that mine is bigger than yours.
Yeah, it could be. So we did almost an hour. So maybe back to the to kind of close it all together, what we came up with. You have the idea of quality, you have the idea of things not speakable, you have the idea of not being the best guys, but still looking forward to solve some worldwide problems still. Can we tell that these components are bringing up to something like, call it beauty in the world or not? I'm just coming up with some possibly flat metaphor, but I'm trying to find this solution. Trying to find this micro one word which can explain everything, which is because the notion of beauty, that notion of beauty is like long gone now from our business system. Nobody speaks about beauty nowadays, but it still exists somehow, and we are trying to find it here and there, or in a combination of the different of the elements or whatever, or being good to the people who are poor, or just being good to the people in general, and so on. So can it be? Maybe this is the replacement of the notion of beauty of the past time.
Again, what replaced beauty? Again, maybe I missed your word.
Good things
Good.
we discussed already,
Yes.
which are not adding to the form, say formal things that please the eye, say it.
Right.
Pleasing the mind, maybe, or pleasing.
In any case, never thought about it. I'm just reacting now to what you're just saying. Whatever it is that replaced beauty is not one thing, but at least two. The balance, I think, it's this and that, and I guess that kind of capacity to hold together opposite things, and there's a fertile, or the origin of fertility maybe in that capacity to hold together things that in principle shouldn't be together, forces that are pulling in different directions. This is what I mean by the power of synthesis, and somehow to something that is flexible enough to react to life and yet timeless. So as soon as we found ourselves, and then again, this is not a theory, it's just the way we experience or try to push forward what we're trying to do. We normally, as soon as we find ourselves pursuing one direction, we should immediately try to go in the other direction, and otherwise there's something...
Back mirrors are really important, right?
Sorry?
Back mirrors on the car.
Kind of, yeah. You move forward but this is more complicated. It's like moving in both directions, opposite directions simultaneously. I don't know how to explain that thing, but maybe it's that's kind of balance. Whatever. But in any case, I think that relevance is a word that I feel that has been away from architecture. Maybe the modern movement was trying to tackle relevant issues. Maybe the way they did that was wrong, but the problems were shared by a society. I think in the last 30, 40 years, architecture, whenever you went to an architectural exhibition, that's why I stopped going there and buying architectural books. The words that were used were very hard to understand. Nobody but architects cared about the problems architects were dealing with. So we were a very endogamic kind of looking at your own belly button kind of attitude. So what at least we're trying to do is that the problems that we're trying to engage are a problem that everybody can share. Simple words, as I mentioned before, poverty, resentment, violence, pollution, traffic. It's not easy to solve.
Basic stuff, yeah.
But going from the airport here and taking, 3 hours, that's a major problem. You don't need complicated ways to describe it. It's just traffic, period. How do you solve the thing? That's a different story. But I guess that the kind of problems and struggles that we shall go into are like this, as simple as this. Repression, dignity. I was struck in coming out of, and that's why maybe it took even longer, coming out of the airplane, going through customs. There was no clear line. So there was a lot of people, and then you're separated. Russians here, non-Russians over there. We enter the part of the non-Russians, and it was full of Russians. And there was no clear line. Because there was no clear line, the entire crowd was in tension to try not to lose the moment to go into the officer to show the passport. So it was a kind of physical thing. You were not guaranteed the right to get your passport. Look, you have to fight for that. And that, I think, is a lack of dignity. Because it was a kind of reverse discrimination, because me and another guy that was next to me, coming to the same event tomorrow, we didn't look Russians maybe, but we kind of jumped the line. I thought that this is extremely violent. I mean, this is not a democratic thing, and this kind of problem that you have the dignity that you arrive there and you have your turn and you wait. It may take long, fine. I mean, there may not be enough officers, fine. But you know your turn will come. If that is not guaranteed, I think that is extremely violent. And the fight for dignity in a simple situation of queuing in line, there is a forum that can contribute to that. There are many other things. Of course, you can change the immigration law, and you can assign more people, and of course, many different professions can have a say. We, as architects, can make a very simple thing that whenever you're coming to, in the end, you form a line that then, as soon as somebody is free, you will go to that. And instead of choosing your line in advance with all the stress, did I choose the right line? Maybe I should have gone down, and then I changed the line, that kind of thing. So from design, we can make a contribution. It's a specific contribution using form to a problem that is beyond that, which is as simple as dignity or democracy, whatever you want to call it.
Great. Maybe somebody wants to ask something too. Yeah, somebody wants to ask.
Hello, my name is Nika, I'm an architect, and I have one question. First of all, I want to say that it was great conversation, very interesting, and I want to say thank you both of us. I have a lot of questions in the beginning of discussion, but most of all you answered yet. And I still only one question. It's very simple. And for most of students, architect students, and I think it's not for maybe for students, for practice architects too, that we believe that we can change the world. And the most our ideas really can change something and are very important. Not only for you, for another people maybe which you never seen and you can understand their problems, but you're sure that you can do something very great and they will be to live very happy in this. And I want to ask that, is it very important in architect personality? Or what do you think? It's better for architecture to be personality, or it's better to be something from socially, or maybe it's only bad thing for architecture? And for example, is it the same importance when the phrase it's a brick should be in arch? It will be the same importance if it's to set something else, not Louis Kahn. And don't think I'm a Louis Kahn fans, and I'm envy to you that you have seen his building in Bangladesh.
When you say personality, you mean a kind of known person? That's what you mean?
Yeah.
You know, okay. Well, I would...
Sorry, I mean ambitions maybe in architecture that you've seen that it will be better for someone.
So there's a question about if changing the world. Let me answer in two ways. There was a school in Chile in the 60s that's called Valparaíso School. It's a city close to the ocean, and maybe one of the most interesting experiments in Latin America, trying to find the relationship between architecture and poetry. They were very radical. If you take a look at the architecture they produced, they were kind of deconstructivists far ahead everybody else in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And they said that as a reaction to the modern movement that wanted to change the world, they say we shouldn't change the world, we should start by changing life, our own life. I think that the first step is that you change your personal attitude towards life. If you haven't changed you personally and how much you need, what you want, what are your ambitions, I mean, then you can't, I mean, ultimately every single major challenge in the world is a very private matter in the sense that I start by changing myself. I mean, I interrogate myself, do I pass the pillow test or not? I mean, when I put my head in the pillow, do I sleep well? That's why I think the change life more than change the world is one way to enter. The second, the change the world is more focused on the response, on the answer more than the question. So again, I would displace the energy into the question before choosing to change the world. I would try to choose if the problem matters or not. Whatever I'm going to spend my energy, skills and interest and desires is something that is relevant or it's irrelevant. And that's, I would say, it's another choice that then, as a combination of changing life and having chosen a relevant matter, it changes the world, fine. Otherwise, and this is just the outcome. I mean, I guess that one, not also, you know, in addition, not to be frustrated, I would say start by making the first two, and then we'll see.
I have to say good evening, maybe, to you. It's a big luck to be here and to hear you, because I was wondering for it maybe 6 years, because it was so important for me. So I have to answer you one question, because it was a question about changing the world, and I'm a student, and I don't know exactly how to change the world, and I don't know exactly how to design well. So how to educate myself? Because many people have many opinions. Do you have to see a lot of good architecture, or do you have to see a lot of, I don't know, a lot of nature, a lot of, or do you have to have conversation with a lot of people to understand what they want, or something like this? So it's a question. Thank you.
All of them. I think it's extremely important to swallow the body of knowledge of architecture. This is where your instruments will come from. Your tools will come from those that have done it before you in a good way. Somehow, to design is to prefer. I mean, circle, square, square, square. How big? What is the size of the square? How high? What material? I mean, the chain of choices during the design process is infinite. So you better make sure that you look at projects of those that were good at preferring. So whenever you study architecture, would at least what I was trying to do, I studied in Chile, in a country that has no really relevant culture, architectural culture. Peru has the Inca Empire, Mexico has the Azteca Empire, Chile has nothing, zero. Which is not a bad thing, because you don't have parents to kill. You start from scratch. But I studied architecture with photographs. So when I came to Europe for the first time, it was a shock to look at the buildings I only knew from old books. And in those buildings, what I was trying to do was to try to understand, as the guy was in front of the blank paper, what are the choices that you have to make in front of the blank paper? That infinite chain of choices. If design is preferring, there's people that prefer better than others. So walk on those footsteps while studying architecture. That's why I was drawing. Drawing is building again. How you put things. How do you this joint of different materials? If you draw, you understand how it was built. If you measure, you understand how it was preferred. So that's one thing, to take your lessons directly from the professors, which is the built world. Talk to good professors, have a big play, the mentors, and bad professors too. I studied in Chile in '85 until 1990, so last period of Pinochet, the dictator. And so information was heavily controlled, and there was no democracy. So there was a kind of resistance attitude towards the bad professor, which was an extremely healthy thing for intellectual independence. We entered classes just for the pleasure to say the contrary of what the professor was saying. And that builds, if you're able to resist that fight, then you're building your own intellectual independence and autonomy, and do not buy whatever you're being said. And then, of course, you use common sense. Sometimes you just buy the thing from the good ones because it saves time. And maybe this goes to the third thing, how to educate yourself. Well, you have to educate yourself as much as possible, and whatever is not in yourself, well, partner with the right person. I mean, I was very much influenced by this engineer with whom we found Elemental in 2000 at Harvard University. He's a transport engineer. He was doing his master's in the Kennedy School of Government, so in public policies. And he said that he never understood architects. When in the school, he ended up teaching afterwards in the architecture school, and there was a workshop about building schools in the periphery. And he said, well, why you architects to do a workshop about schools in the periphery have to become experts in education? So every single student presenting a project had swallowed a lot of information, tried to become an expert in education. What an engineer does, instead of wasting time in that, he will hire the best one in education to tell him what are the 3-4 crucial things to do. We tend not to do that. I don't know why we tend to become experts in every single thing that we do. And then, of course, you have to become an expert in museum thing and in social housing. I mean, instead of partnering with the guys that know the stuff. So it's a healthy shortcut that you partner with the people that know, but to discriminating what matters and what doesn't matter, go back to the second point, your intellectual autonomy is very important. And then, going back to the first point, you translate all that into form by having learned from buildings themselves.
Hello, thanks a lot. It was inspiring as usual. And I have a question about Biennale, because I'm curious. Is it interesting, challenging, hard, not interesting to be a curator after Koolhaas words? I mean, with all respect, your manifesto was super inspiring, because it seems to be that we can have a chance to see less architecture, but more, this hybrid of architecture and something else. So could you explain the first question, and in 2 words, what the Biennale on your point will be this year?
We normally in the office
Обычно
do
в офисе
things
мы
that we have no idea what they're about.
работаем
We
над чем-то,
we
что
are
нам
very rigorous
неизвестно.
with our ignorance.
То есть мы
Because
можем
whenever you
многого
go
не
into a
знать,
charged
тем не
field,
менее мы работаем. Когда вы приходите
if
в
you
новое поле, неизвестное
if you're
вам,
kind of expert, the risk to be paralyzed is kind of high.
очень часто,
There's a
если,
saying in
например, вы
Spanish, I
эксперт
don't
в этой
know the
сфере,
literal
есть
translation
очень
will
большой
be,
риск
who knows
стать
nothing
парализованным.
fears nothing.
То есть тот, кто ничего не
Had we
знает,
known what
ничего не
social
боится.
housing was,
Если
maybe
бы
we would
мы
have never
знали,
entered social
что
housing. In
такое
the year
социальное
2000, I
жилье,
had
мы бы,
no
возможно,
idea what a
никогда не
subsidy
стали бы
was.
заниматься
So,
им.
in a country
Я
that
не знала даже, что такое
60% of what's being
субсидия,
built uses a kind of
потому что у
subsidy,
нас
when I arrived at Harvard University, and I
для
had no idea
жилищного
what a
вот этого
subsidy was
социального
self-embarrassing.
строительства
I felt bad
пользоваться
to be
субсидиями.
so
И мне было
ignorant.
очень
But with
стыдно,
that
что я даже не
ignorance,
знал, что
you
существуют
eventually,
эти
not
субсидии в
always,
нашей стране.
eventually do
И
those stupid questions that in
поэтому,
church fields allow you
несмотря
to
на
move
то, что
forward.
вы чего-то не
Because
знаете, вы
you
задаете
don't take
глупые
anything
вопросы,
for
однако
granted.
это вас
And that was exactly
продвигает на
the same
вашем
thing we
пути,
did
потому что
with the
вы не
reconstruction after
воспринимаете все как
earthquake and
что-то уже
tsunami
готовое, у вас
and with
нет
social
готовых
riots
ответов.
in Chile
Именно
working
поэтому мы
for companies
занимались
or entering
реконструкцией
government
территории
projects
после
now at the
цунами,
political scale.
занимаемся сейчас
I think that the Biennale was the
правительственными
same. I've never
проектами.
curated
И я
anything
надеюсь,
before.
что Биеннале будет
So who knows nothing,
точно таким же явлением. Я
Я
никогда не был куратором, а
And
тот,
we'll
кто
see.
ничего не знает,
Having not curated anything before, I can't compare
сделает
to
что-то
what is
интересное.
expected and what is not expected.
Я не знаю, мне трудно сравнивать, я не знаю, что
I didn't
ожидается.
visit the Rem Koolhaas Biennale,
Я не был
so
на Биеннале Рема
even from that point
Koolhaasa.
of view, I'm not reacting, not
И
kind
поэтому я
I didn't see it.
не буду каким-то образом
of course, on the internet
проявлять
there's a lot
свою
of information, but
реакцию.
it's not the same
Конечно
thing.
же, в интернете очень много информации, однако это не одно и то же.
What we're doing is not in relation to previous biennales or
Мы
previous
будем
curations
делать
because we
что-то,
don't
что
know
никак не
anything about
связано
it.
с
We just
предыдущими
thought the
биеннале.
biennale it's a very powerful
Мы знаем, что
loudspeaker
Биеннале это
to,
очень мощный громкоговоритель,
whatever you're thinking to be
который
shared
позволит вам
as
донести свое
globally as
послание
possible.
как
know,
можно
if we were
большем
in the film
масштабе.
industry,
Допустим, если
of course, if you
представить,
have
что
a
мы
film,
работаем
you
в
want that film
киноиндустрии,
to be
вы
seen
делаете
by
фильмы,
many
конечно же, вы
people, and
хотите,
then
чтобы
there's the
ваш фильм
Oscars,
посмотрели как
and then
можно
there's
больше
the
людей, потом,
Berlin
да,
Festival,
будет
the Venice Biennale,
Оскар,
the Venice Festival,
будет
Cannes, there are many
Венецианский,
festivals. In
Берлинский, Каннский
architecture,
фестиваль,
there's
много
only one,
фестивалей.
which is
А в
Venice. So I
архитектуре
guess it's
только
a very
есть
powerful
Венецианская
opportunity.
биеннале,
If you
поэтому
have
это очень
something to
хорошая
say,
возможность.
you say it
Если
there.
вам есть что сказать,
So
вы должны
the
сказать
only
это там.
attempt has been that whatever you say, try
Что
to
бы вы ни
make that
говорили,
whatever you're opening your mouth for is
когда вы
something that makes
открываете
sense.
рот,
Be
нужно
reasonable
сделать,
and
да,
be
нужно сказать
creative
так,
so
чтобы это было
that you start
понятно,
from a
чтобы это
reasonable
имело
challenge
смысл.
and then you
Творчески
contribute to that
необходимо
challenge with a
отнестись к
specific knowledge of architecture, which is
процессу.
form making,
Понятно,
design
что
making,
у вас
to
много
bring things
знаний,
into a potential
и
state
вы
of being.
можете
Organize the information
сделать очень
into a
многое,
proposal key. I think that's very
организовать
powerful
информацию
in
так,
architecture.
как предложено. И это
You
очень
know, when
большая
entering
возможность,
tough
мощная
issues,
возможность в
the
архитектуре.
risk of
Когда
just
вы
complaining is really high.
работаете с трудными
And then we will maybe
проблемами,
eventually
очень
tackle tough
высокий
issues,
уровень жалоб.
but then propose
И,
nothing. By
может
nature,
быть, мы
architecture
столкнемся
at
с
its
трудными
very core
проблемами и не
has the
сможем
project.
ничего
The project by
предложить.
definition means to
Но
organize
проект
information into a proposal key. So I guess that
организовать
the power
информацию
of
в
architecture, of
соответствии с
synthesis
требованиями.
and
И я
organizing
считаю,
information in a proposal key
в
cannot
этом
be wrested from
сила
relevant
архитектуры и
issues.
сила
So
синтеза.
the thing is, let's invite people throughout the world
То
that
есть
have
необходимо пригласить
that are
людей
trying to
из
make a
разных
contribution
стран
through
мира,
the specific
которые
knowledge
могут
of
внести
architecture,
свой
which
вклад
is
на основе
making
знаний
forms,
архитектуры,
to
которые
non-specific
занимаются
problems that interest the
формой,
society at large.
и сделать так, чтобы это было интересно самым широким слоям населения.
It's me again. In the
Это
beginning
опять
of
я.
discussion, you said a
В
phrase that
начале
it's very important
дискуссии вы сказали,
to have
что
answer,
очень важно
question and answer. And
иметь вопрос
you
и
know, I think
ответ.
it's a theory of Toynbee of history that
Это
it's the best civilization become in a very difficult
историческая теория о том, что самая
places, very
лучшая
difficult
цивилизация
places,
сталкивалась
and
с
civilization become
большими
greater and the more strength.
трудностями, и
And I have a
это
question
закаляло
about
эту
that.
цивилизацию, эта цивилизация
What do you
становилась
think?
все
What
сильнее
is
и
better for
сильнее.
architecture?
Скажите, что
That, for
лучше
example,
для архитектуры?
in Europe, it's very
Например, в
high quality
Европе
of simple architects,
очень
simple houses. But, for
высокое
example,
качество
about Cannes,
гражданского строительства.
in India, it's
А если
very
говорить об архитектуре Канна в
poor
Индии,
country, but we
Индия
can see
это
it's very
бедная страна,
not a lot, but one building, but it may be
и там
better
может
one
быть только
building this
одно
kind or the
здание.
mass of architecture in
И,
Europe. What do you
возможно, это
think? What is
здание
better
намного
for great
лучше,
architecture?
чем масса зданий в Европе. Вот что
As I
важнее
said
для
before, when you were
архитектора?
talking about beauty,
Ну, как я ранее уже говорил, когда мы говорили о красоте,
I cannot. It's impossible not to answer in the A and B or A and C. And in this
мне нельзя сказать, я не могу сказать, что это одно,
tough
и потом
circumstances, difficulties. Yes,
успокоиться
I
на этом.
mean,
Конечно, трудные
if you don't have a problem,
обстоятельства
why be
закаляют.
creative? You know,
Потому
you
что
need that
если есть
toughness of the
проблема, то,
circumstances
конечно же,
to develop
необходимо проявить
civilization. By the way,
творческое
I did
начало.
not say that you have to have questions and answers. I
И я не
said
говорил,
that
что
there's
нужны
nothing worse
вопросы
than
и
answering
ответы.
well the
Я
wrong
сказал,
question.
что нет
So
ничего
the
хуже,
precision
чем
in
хорошо
identifying what is
ответить
the
на
question
плохой
that needs
вопрос.
to be
То
answered
есть необходимо
deserves as much time
понять,
as
в
going
чем суть
directly into the
вопроса.
answer, which is
И
normally
только
what we architects
отсюда
do, that are too focused
отталкиваться,
on the outcome
потому что очень
before
часто
charging the
архитектура
input. That being
скорее концентрируется на результате,
The tough
а не
circumstances,
на начальном этапе, на формулировании
but I think
вопроса,
the
на
opposite is
формулировании
also
главной
true.
проблемы.
If you have no
И
problems at all,
если нет
also
никаких
civilization
проблем,
has flourished. I mean,
на самом деле тоже
in
неплохо для цивилизации, потому что мы видим расцвет цивилизации,
difficulties.
когда никаких
The
трудностей
thing is that
нет,
if you are
когда нет
there,
никаких
you
трений.
need to be very
Однако,
disciplined.
когда вы находитесь
In the first case, the
среди
discipline
этой
comes from outside
цивилизации, вы должны
yourself.
быть очень
The circumstances
дисциплинированными.
require
Однако
that
эта
if you're not disciplined,
дисциплина,
you bounce back. You don't even are able to
как бы
produce.
навязана.
If somehow you become the difficulties,
И если
then you
вдруг
can produce creative stuff. And this is actually the point, not just respond to the circumstances that go beyond that.
появляются, конечно
On the other hand,
здесь
I don't own, and
важно
that's why
идти
this is not
за
an
пределы,
apology
да, не
of
просто
poverty
решать ту или иную проблему, а
or
идти
that kind of
дальше.
thing. In societies that have solved everything,
Таких обществах,
high
где все
culture
проблемы
and high
решены,
civilization and the best expression of human condition also appears, but you require
есть
a lot
тоже
of
прекрасные
self-discipline.
примеры,
Somehow,
однако требуется
when there's
самодисциплина.
scarcity of means,
Когда
you are required to
дефицит
respond
средств,
with an abundance of meaning.
вы должны
If you have
обеспечить
an abundance of means, then the risk is to have scarcity of meaning.
максимум смысла.
But it's not said that you
Иногда
will
бывает, что
inevitably
очень много
produce
средств
something that
и
is not
минимальный смысл
valuable
это
in
имеет.
a rich environment. The thing is where the discipline and the rigor comes from. In the first case, it's an external one.
Откуда
In the second
вот эта
one,
дисциплина
you carry
проистекает?
it inside of
Внутренняя
yourself. So
она,
I guess that
изнутри идет или
there are good
извне.
examples on both ends.
И есть
for explaining
хорошие примеры
that quality of the
и
built
в одной
environment.
ситуации, и в другой ситуации, если мы говорим о качестве
Some more question
окружающей
there?
среды.
That will be the last, maybe.
One more question, please, but I would. I
Есть
will
еще
ask
один
in
вопрос,
Russian,
но я
if it's
задам
possible.
его на русском языке, если можно.
Вначале вы говорили.
At the
о том-
beginning,
Слышно?
can you hear me?
Я практикующий архитектор.
I'm
и
an
занимаюсь
architect,
коммерческими
and
объектами,
I work with
заказчиками,
commercial
которых
facilities.
являются крупные компании.
And I work
Такие
with large
проекты хорошо
companies.
оплачиваются.
They pay very good money.
Я имею опыт
I also have some experience of social projects as a volunteer.
Скажите, кто является вашим заказчиком?
Who is your
Как вам
customer?
удается
How
совмещать
can you
социальную
combine
архитектуру
social architecture
и делаете ее оплачиваемой.
And how do you make money? Because, like you said at the beginning, social architecture is going to be bad if it's poorly paid for. So what should happen in society? Should there be some governmental program or some change of a mindset so that this social housing, social architecture could be interesting for customers and paid well?
Yes, I think it's a good question, and I can only answer with what was our experience. I don't necessarily think it may apply to other cases, but who is our client or who is our customer? I think it's an important question. Normally in housing policy, that was an unknown client. There was a change in the Chilean housing policy that required that whenever you design a housing complex, you had to have a housing committee on the other side of the table. So we had meetings like this, normally in public schools, where, first of all, we were trying to understand if they knew what the policy was going to deliver. So participatory design was very crucial in the starting of social housing, but for participatory design, we first understood communicate information and communicate constraints, so that we are on the same page. It was very important that we dissipate any high expectations that may have threatened the entire process. So if families were expecting, I don't know what, for lack of information, that it was very clear at the beginning what they can expect from a policy, and when I'm talking about a housing policy, for you to have an idea, we had to build each unit using a subsidy from the government that was $7,500. How much is that in
Everybody knows.
Yeah, okay, $7,500 with which we have to buy the land in the market, provide the infrastructure, and build the house. That was more or less divided in three. 1/3 for land with $2,500 per family. The only available land was in the peripheries 2 hours away where land cost nothing. That is a social political disaster. $2,500 for infrastructure that worked reasonably well. $2,500 to build the house. A car cost 2 times that. So you had to build the house with that amount of money. That's why the scarcity of means meant that at the very first project, if we were really efficient, we could build around 30 square meters. And that meant that because we had studied a little bit what the slums were, that families will add on that tiny initial unit anyhow. So, first notion of how to meet your client, have meetings where you understand what they're expecting and you explain what you can do and what you cannot do. And that process of horizontal democratic information, even though it was very hard, because at the beginning when I say, look, with the money we are going to be able to deliver 30 square meters, means a room like this size. Of course you get booed and people say, what the fuck you think you are? I mean, there's a lot of anger in that, but it's not my fault. Those are the rules of the game. So we can go backwards to academia and say, look, we will wait until the conditions are better, or we do something with the rules of the game, because 100,000 subsidies will be delivered anyhow in a $17 million country. So a small country builds 100,000 units a year anyhow. So let's try to do better within those rules. When that information was shared, we, with the families, said, look, knowing that we can build only this, and we will need another extra added square meters as big as the initial one, let's split task. Let's agree what we will do and what you will have to take care afterwards. So that process of negotiation, who does what, which is the incremental finishing of the initial design, was part of the participatory design process. Last, allow families to define the list of priorities. they may know better than us what is more important to them. There are things that we don't negotiate. I'm not negotiating, we're going to do the structure in this and that, because I know what works better, and I can't care less if all of the room voted in favor of doing a different thing. No, we want paint. I'm not giving paint. Paint is irrelevant. The structure is more relevant. We're not negotiating. But there are other things that you may know better than me, and I find you to choose. For example, there was not enough money for the water heater and the bathtub. We had to do either bathtub or water heater. So we asked people to vote. What do you think people said? How many think that they went for the bathtub? How many for the water heater? Well, they all voted, not just a few. 100% voted for the bathtub. The reason, well, the climate is different than here, but the main reason is that in order to enter the housing process, they had to save out of the $7,500, $7,200 were government subsidy, $300 family savings. They were required to have a saving in order to enter the process. For a poor family, to save $300 took 1.5 years. So when they finally received the house, if they were going to receive the house and they move in, if they have chosen the water heater, they had no money to pay for the gas. So it would have been useless. The bathtub was usable from day one. And this is something that, of course, in my mind, to pay for the gas bill is kind of obvious. In a poor environment, it's not obvious at all. So they know better than me what is more crucial for them, and this process of establishing priorities, because there's not money for everything, you have to choose, was also part of the participatory design process. So you end up creating a responsible, horizontal, splitting task kind of relationship with your client, because they will be part of your process. In that particular policy, it might be that in the market it operates with different rules. And you have then another question. What was the second part of the question besides how do we know our client?
Вторая часть вопроса была в том, как совмещать социальную архитектуру с заказами, которые оплачиваются. То есть как сделать это единой?
Okay. As I said before, we identified that the reason of the lack of quality of, in general, not just social housing, of public works, because nobody was paying the entire productive chain from designer to engineer to builder to social worker, even to politicians. So you need high quality for projects that will end up having massive consequences. So at the beginning, we kind of cross-subsidized our own practice. Let's say at Harvard University, I was getting a fee that instead of being used for a conventional course, I said, look, I would like to use my fee as a professor to come up with something new for social housing. So in that case, we have a donor called university. Normally at universities, do have the time and the resources to think about questions that the market is not taking care of. In a highly centralized country, which was not the case of Chile, maybe the state takes the role of the universities in market economies, and Chile is one of the most free market economies in the world. So we had to identify who could, in the market, subsidize that. Institutions like academia and university was that case. But that was at the very beginning only. We were already, I think we had already 7 projects going on, and we applied for a grant from the state to be able to develop these things, we ran out of that money as well. So at that moment, for almost a year, we were working for free, and that was unsustainable. We had already ongoing projects. We couldn't just leave. The projects were there, but nobody was paying our time, and that was unsustainable. Volunteer work, I think, is not a way to deal with it. So the strategy was to create a for-profit company that had social impact and public interest. So we created this structure, and we partnered with the university and with the Chilean oil company that at the beginning, as part of their social responsibility policy, gave us some seed capital to start working in projects with the condition, and it was some big money at the beginning, so that over a couple of years we could create a system that was charging different institutions what was fair to be charged if you're designing better housing. For example, with that seed capital, a way for a private company to help the workers was to contribute with the design of a housing project that then will be built by the state, but that was designed and subsidized by the company. So big productive mining companies, forest companies, for example, as part of their policies, were paying our time, and then with that time, within the set of rules of the public policy, we were producing better products that the market then built, following the conventional policy. No extra or special treatment required, just follow the market rules. So this is how, at the beginning, Elemental was partnering with companies that gave us the seed capital. Over time, because our focus was not social housing, was trying to improve quality in the built environment, we begin to add other things. Public transportation projects, my partner at the time was a transport engineer, so it was a natural thing. Infrastructure, he does roads, so he knows how to do that, but public space for having public impact, and ultimately we never lived, and that's how we started. We were doing buildings, and so the innovation center or the buildings for the university was a way to have the numbers of the company in blue. Two conditions. You need to need little so that you don't have to keep on having projects just to pay the company. So you have somehow are austere. On the other hand, try to be diverse. Try to have many projects from many different fields so that you not have all your assets just in one place.
Thank you very much. I think we have to finish finally, okay. Because they are going to ask you for some interview after, so there's another story. Итак, спасибо большое. Это было прекрасно. That was good.